The AFC North is one of the most prestigious and competitive divisions in NFL history. In the 3 of the last 4 years, we have seen the AFC North produce 3 teams with winning records in their division. Since 2010, we have seen the Baltimore Ravens go to 9 of the last 14 playoff races, 4 of the last 5. The Pittsburgh Steelers go to 9 of the last 14 playoff races, 3 of the 5. The Cincinnati Bengals go to 7 of the last 14, 2 of the 5. And the Cleveland Browns, with a little bit less success, going to 2 of the last 14, but with those 2 playoff races still being in 2 of the last 5 years. It has been a division that has given us classic rivalries, bitter rivalries. It has been a division that has produced some classic and historical nostalgic teams, such as the Baltimore Ravens' insane defenses in 2000 that included legends, heavy hitters such as Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, running back in Jamal Lewis. The Cincinnati Bengals, who were led by the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton, A.J. Green, veteran running back Giovanni Bernard, and on the defensive side, guys such as Adam Pac-Man Jones and heavy hitter Vontaze Burfict. The Pittsburgh Steelers, who were able to produce the triple Bs of Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, and Ben Roethlisberger, one of the most impressive offensive attacks that we have seen in the NFL's history. It has produced some memorable moments in NFL history, whether that was against these teams, such as the Cleveland Browns having an 0-16 season, whether it was the Baltimore Ravens, the Mile High Miracle back in 2013, Jacoby Jones, kickoff return in the blackout Super Bowl that same year. And more importantly, it's a division that now has one of the most impressive quarterback competitions in all of the league. That includes Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, now veteran Russell Wilson, and Deshaun Watson. So the question is, what lies in wait for this division? That's what we're going to find out today. The commentary of the AFC North starts right now. Welcome back to the Play-by-Play podcast. This is episode number 42, where today we are going to be doing a full preview and early prediction for the 2024-2025 season for the AFC North. I'm your host, Diego Gallegos. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. And if you have not already, please, I encourage you to go ahead. If you are watching this on YouTube, feel free to subscribe. Leave a like on the video, turn on the channel's notifications, share with your friends, and leave a comment down below. And if you have not already, please feel free to go ahead and follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. There's going to be a banner appearing right here where you can find all the ads. But if you miss it, they are always down below, either in the episode description or in the YouTube description. Without further ado, let's get into it. The AFC North. What a division that has been full of many bitter and physical rivalries throughout its time. Whether that's the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers going at it in the playoffs, where you have Vontaze Burfict knocking out Antonio Brown. Whether it's having incredible down the field passes, such as huge time Hail Marys, such as the Ravens and Bengals game from about 10 years ago. It has produced so many memorable moments in the NFL and has produced so many historic players throughout its history. And this year is set to be another huge competitive year for this division. You heard me say it during the intro. 3 of the last 4 years, they have produced 3 teams with winning records. It is a division where teams have struggled to stay on top. Looking at the history of it right here, last year you had the Baltimore Ravens taking the division, but the year before that you have the Cincinnati Bengals taking the division. Cincinnati took it the year before that. Pittsburgh took it the year before that. Then Baltimore took it the 2 years prior. It has been an absolute headache to stay on top of this division and compete with the teams as they are continuously growing with the huge markets that they have. Free agents are being attracted every single year throughout free agency, and throughout the recent years, there hasn't really been many faults when it comes to front office decisions. Really, the only thing that you can really point out is the Cincinnati Bengals not getting Joe Burrow a suitable offensive line. And maybe even if you want to go a little bit farther than that, you could look at possibly Le'Veon Bell's holdout, or the Cleveland Browns struggle to draft a starting quarterback. But outside of that, it's been a division that has been solid and gaining solid players to continue to keep these teams competitive and on top. So without further ado, let's hop into this AFC North, the play-by-play podcast, AFC North 2024-2025 early predictions. I have the Baltimore Ravens finishing in first place at 13-3. I have the Cincinnati Bengals finishing in second at 10-5. I have the Cleveland Browns finishing in third at 9-8, and I have the Pittsburgh Steelers finishing in last place with a record of 6-11. That's right. Once again, we find this division with 3 out of the 4 teams having winning records. And this time around, I'm going to start from the bottom up. So let's start with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I have going 6-11. What is the huge deal here with the Pittsburgh Steelers? All eyes on the Pittsburgh Steelers this year will be on their quarterback room. The Steelers go from having Kenny Pickett, somebody who coming out of the draft was the most pro-ready quarterback in an awful quarterback class, but somebody who was looked at as not having a very high potential, not having a very high ceiling, being very, very limited as to how far he would possibly be able to take a team. And that proved correct. Had a couple of solid seasons with Pittsburgh, but it was clear that with him behind the wheel, they were going to have a ceiling on them as a team, because you're only as good as your captain is. You're only as good as the man who is throwing the ball, getting you points. And so to combat that, they go out and they get one of the most experienced veterans, playoff veterans, Super Bowl champion veterans in Russell Wilson. And they also go ahead and trade a 6th-round pick to the Chicago Bears and get an explosive young backup in Justin Fields. Now, Wilson ended his 2 years in Denver with a strained, exhausted, and pretty much broken relationship with Denver. It was a situation in Denver where he was really restricted as far as his character, what he was allowed to do from an offensive perspective. And when he was let go, they completely released the reins off of him and let him go wild. And that just simply was not the same system that he was under in Seattle. He was under a very babied situation with Pete Carroll in Seattle, in which he had an all-pro legendary power back, one of the best power backs in the game, that did not allow him to get into scary situations along goal line situations, and alongside tough situations such as 4th and 1s, 4th and 2, 4th and 3, because all they really had to do was hand it off to Marshawn Lynch, and you got a first down. You got a touchdown. But now that he is in Pittsburgh, there seems to be a little bit more confidence from him. There seems to be a little bit more happiness. There seems to be a little bit more freedom with the leash still on him, but it seems like he's able to get a little bit further out. And with an experienced coach in Mike Tomlin, who still really has not had an awful season in Pittsburgh, somebody who is very experienced, somebody who I believe could bring back that baby type system that Coach Pete Carroll had in Seattle. And if they do not have that with Russell Wilson, you can turn to Justin Fields. It's the exact reason that you got him. If Wilson works out, perfectly fine. Give Justin Fields a couple of years to learn behind Russell Wilson, have him become a lot more mature in his game and less wild as he showed in Chicago. But if he does not work out, let Justin Fields go. This is a man who, while has not grown a lot in his career, has some high explosive potential, not only in the passing game, but in the running game as well. Has been somebody who has shown me signs of his division rival now in Lamar Jackson, somebody who could potentially rush for 500 plus, 600 plus yards as a quarterback and still continue to be successful throughout the air. You can turn to him. You can be comfortable with him taking the reins, and you can be comfortable with him being your next franchise quarterback if Russell Wilson does not work out. Now, when it comes to the rest of the roster, Pittsburgh struggles in a lot of places that a lot of their other division rivals struggle with. mainly that being the O-line room. Now, they did add Troy Fatanu to their own line room at tackle. One of my favorite offensive tackles out of Oregon State. Absolutely loved him. Thought that he was one of the most polished tackles in this draft, outside of possibly a Joe Alt that ended up in Los Angeles. They also traded Deontay Johnson, their top receiver, somebody who did a great job in yards after catch, somebody who was very opposite from George Pickens, who now becomes their number one receiver. George Pickens, much more of a streaky guy that likes to run down the field and challenge for the ball. Deontay Johnson, somebody who has a plethora of different routes, the 5-yard slant routes, the out routes, the drag routes, the crossing routes, the streak routes. He can basically do it all. But they now got Deontay Johnson for Dante Jackson. And they hope that Dante Jackson can now add to a secondary that obviously includes Minkah Fitzpatrick. That obviously includes Joey Porter Jr. That obviously includes Deshaun Elliott. They are hoping that Dante Jackson can add to this secondary room and improve what has been a pretty below average secondary group from their perspective. Now, they did have the 9th most passing interceptions in the league last year, but they were still 25th in passing offense, 25th in passing yards. Excuse me, 25th in passing yards allowed last season. So now adding Dante Jackson into that, you're hoping that his speed, he can get his coverage skills up, but with his athleticism, with his pure speed, he can add on to Joey Porter Jr. and Minkah Fitzpatrick and potentially create a scary secondary in Pittsburgh. Outside of that, they did a huge acquisition, acquiring Patrick Queen away from the Baltimore Ravens. Not only do you take one of your division rivals' best defensive players, probably best defensive players on that roster, but you now pair him up with TJ Watt, who has struggled with injury concerns. So if he goes away with injury, Patrick Queen can definitely take over and be the leader of that defense. But he can also do an incredible job at stuffing the run. He adds to a Pittsburgh Steelers defense that was 21st in total defense last year. He adds to a Pittsburgh Steelers defense that was having a lot of trouble stuffing the run when it came into the red zone. A really solid acquisition for the Pittsburgh Steelers there. And with Russell Wilson now behind the helm, if he can be consistent and if the running backs can have a quicker start than they did last year, Najee Harris had a little bit of a rough start to the season. Jalen Moore was able to pick up the slack early, and then Harris came on towards the end of the year. If they can have consistent play from their main playmakers, Russell Wilson, Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, if they could get a little bit more of a variety out of George Pickens' route, they are going to be in a really solid position with a head coach in Mike Tomlin, who once again has not had a very bad season. So if the quarterbacks can be solid, definitely for sure could have another solid 9-8, possibly 10-7 season if they perform well. But it is going to be really difficult. They have listed as the hardest schedule in this league. Obviously, you have their oppositions in the division, but to add on to that, they have to play high-powered offenses such as Atlanta, LA, New York Jets, the Kansas City Chiefs. They also have to play some pretty solid defenses such as the Philadelphia Eagles, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Indianapolis Colts. This is not an easy schedule for Pittsburgh to get to. So if they get off to a slow start, they are going to be lagging behind their adversaries, and they are going to be looking at possibly one of Mike Tomlin's first losing seasons in the NFL. But they're able to hang on. They're able to come on quickly. If they're able to get some team chemistry early and start making good things against these top teams, they're going to be in really good position. I have them getting off to a little bit of a slow start. I have them losing pretty much most of their division games. I believe I have them going 1-5 in all of their division games this year. It's looking like one of Mike Tomlin's roughest seasons in Pittsburgh, but the future is bright. I think that they can build a really solid core off of what they have. Moving on into third place, we have the Cleveland Browns at 9-8. Very interesting situation in Cleveland because they were basically the exact opposite of how I described the Miami Dolphins in my last video. Miami's offense was awesome, but the defense was lagging behind. Now you have in Cleveland, undoubtedly, they had the best defense in the league last year, but the offense was at best average. Now I know you had a late season injury to Deshaun Watson. But when you look at these defensive stats, first in total defense, first in passing defense, they had the 32nd, they had the least amount of passing yards allowed. They had the 6th most sacks in the league. They had the 3rd most interceptions. They were creating turnovers. They were creating a lot of opportunities for this offense, and it fell flat. And the thing that's really making me nervous for the Cleveland Browns right now is they did not really add much this offseason when it comes to the offensive edge. In fact, they lost their tight end and Harrison Bryant to the Las Vegas Raiders, somebody who has great ability. And all they really added was Jerry Jeudy, somebody who still has a very high potential, still, in my opinion, is one of the best route runners in this league. But as far as what he did in Denver, wasn't somebody that showed an ability to possibly even be a number 2 wide receiver in this league. Nonetheless, possibly taking over for Amari Cooper after he begins to slow down at the number 1. Jerry Jeudy is somebody who I think at best right now is a solid route running slot receiver with his quickness in the league. So what do you do? Because you added Jerry Jeudy now, but you do have Nick Chubb coming off of a bad injury. You did not really lose much when it comes to the offensive line side of things. You have Joel Bitonio, you have Jedrick Willis, you have Jack Conklin on that opposite side. You have David Njoku still there, so they do have some solid weapons. The question is going to be, can the wide receiver core elevate Deshaun Watson? Can Nick Chubb continue to be the Nick Chubb that we've seen him be before injury? And can this defense be the same? Because when you look at the defense, there are still incredible players. This is still slated to be one of the best defenses, one of the best pass rushes in the league. Do not get me wrong. Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson, Myles Garrett. They added a great linebacking group, a great linebacking rotation of Jordan Hicks and Devin Bush, adding in some much needed speed onto this defense. But when you look at the secondary side of things, you do not have anybody across from Denzel Ward. And speaking as a Denver Broncos fan, that number 2 corner spot is a huge deal. Denver has one of the best cornerbacks in Patrick Surtain II right now. And they are struggling in the pass game because that number 2 corner continues to be an issue. They continues to be targeted by opposing teams. And when you look at what they have, Greg Newsome II, Martin Emerson Jr., not very high profile names that you would like in that spot. So the question for Cleveland fans is, how much is that number 2 cornerback going to matter? Is the pass rush going to be able to get there in time on the quarterbacks before that hole is torn any larger? If it's not able to, they're going to have a difficult time because they also have a very difficult season ahead. The 30th easiest schedule, the third most difficult schedule in the league right now, having to face very solid quarterbacks in Dak Prescott with the Dallas Cowboys. You have Trevor Lawrence with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Tua Tagovailoa. Those are all quarterbacks that they are going to have to face, and all quarterbacks that have some very solid weapons around them, assuming guys such as CeeDee Lamb return to the team, assuming guys such as Xavier Worthy work out in Kansas City, and assuming that Trevor Lawrence can get back up to form. They are facing some very solid quarterbacks, some very solid weapons. And if that second cornerback spot cannot hold, and if that pass rush cannot get there, they are going to get fried in the passing game. If they can get there, they're going to have a much easier time because the running game is not going to be there against them. They're going to absolutely stuff any running back, swallow any running back that runs up the middle or even on the outside. But if the pass rush cannot get there, that number 2 cornerback spot is going to matter a lot more than I think a lot of people are looking at. And when you put in the factor that they have a very solid division rival quarterback room around them, when you look at the fact that they have the 3rd hardest schedule with some very solid quarterbacks going up against, I'm just not sure if this team made the right moves by not getting another high quality number 2 receiver and by not beefing up the secondary because their pass rush was already really talented. So I have them taking a little bit of a dip here. Deshaun Watson has not proven to be the same quarterback that we saw in Houston a couple of years ago. And with the lack of weapons on his side, it seems to be that Cleveland is going to have another average year, possibly could sneak into the playoffs, but is going to need a little bit of luck on their side, for sure. For sure. Bringing us up to the number 2 team in the division, we have the Baltimore Ravens, a huge, huge surprise. It was a team that when first making these season predictors, I had them up at around 14-3. I had them actually taking an improvement from their 13-4 record in the previous season. But as I began going into the games and as I really started to look at this team, there are some holes, just like in Cleveland, that I cannot ignore with this Ravens team. There are some losses that they had that are huge when looking at the talent in this team. And I'm just not sure. I think that they made some very solid moves, but from a experience perspective, I don't think that they're there right now in terms of competing for a playoff spot. Now, the Ravens ended last year with the best rushing offense in the league. That was spearheaded by none other than Gus Edwards. Now, of course, Lamar Jackson added into that. We cannot take that away from him. But it was a running back room that was spearheaded by a power back in Gus Edwards and Dalvin Cook, who was picked up late in the season in free agency. But now, Baltimore walks into next season with one of, if not the top power back in the league in Derrick Henry. Now, the question now is, how much does Henry have left in the tank at 30 years old? How much more can Henry carry? And especially now with some of the losses that the Ravens had on their offensive line. They lost Kevin Zeitler at guard. They lost Morgan Moses at tackle. Derrick Henry is going to be facing a lot more competition when it comes to defenses being able to get in the backfield. He is going to have to be doing a lot more work that I'm not sure he can continue to do at a very high level at 30 years old. Now, because of Jackson's mobility, the O-line is not really a huge priority in the passing game because he goes outside of the pocket all the time. He is able to create plays and get positive yardage out of plays that are virtually dead. But Henry is going to need some help to be productive. And it's just a toss-up right now as to if the Ravens have enough to support him for another 1,000-yard season. That's a huge hole, the offensive line. Another huge hole is defensively. The Ravens have a lot to answer to. Like I said with Pittsburgh, losing Patrick Queen to a division rival absolutely stings, losing one of your top players. And Jadeveon Clowney and Ronald Darby are two pieces that contributed to what was one of the highest turnover-rated defenses last year. That is right. They had the 6th total defense, the 6th best passing defense. They were 1st in sacks last year. They were 3rd in interceptions. They were the best scoring defense. They were able to get turnovers and score off of those turnovers consistently. But now, the pass rush is gone. The linebacker stuffing up the run in the middle is gone. One of your top corners, alongside Marlon Humphrey, is gone. And you replace them with, I think, some solid talent. You grab Nate Wiggins from Clemson late in the first round at cornerback, somebody who I think as an athlete was probably one of the best athletes in this draft class this year, somebody who I think right now could do perfectly at plugging in the slot position. You got Roger Rosengarten at offensive tackle, somebody who in the future could definitely plug in and replace somebody such as Morgan Moses. And you have Adisa Isaac, who I believe they got in the 3rd or 4th round, who once again, from an athletic perspective, is going to do a very solid job. But right now, you'd rather have Patrick Queen. Right now, you'd rather have Ronald Darby. Right now, you'd rather have Jadeveon Clowney. Right now, you'd rather have Morgan Moses, even with some potential injury concerns with him. And when you look at the Ravens' offensive side, continuing from the offensive line, there's still not really great weapons in the passing game. Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman have been very good X-factor wide receivers. They have been people that have shown up solid ability when it comes to speed. But I'm not sure if either of them are really number 1 wide receiver caliber players. Sure, they could be a solid number 2 and number 3, but they're not Amari Cooper. They're not Jamar Chase. They're not CeeDee Lamb. They're possibly not even excuse me. They're possibly not even on the level of somebody like a Brandon Ayuk. So how far is this passing game going to be able to go to? Because if the running game is not there, if the offensive line continues to give up negative yards in the backfield, they're going to have to count on this passing game. And sure, there's some solid players. Obviously, Mark Andrews, one of the best tight ends in the league. But the holes just seem to be getting bigger every single year with this Ravens team. When you look at the defense, Odafe Away, one of the best young linebackers. They have Roquan Smith still. But Michael Pierce is really the spearhead of that defensive line. Like I mentioned, you lose Ronald Darby. You now have Marlon Humphrey, and listed on their depth chart right now, second in line isn't even Nate Wiggins. It's Brandon Stevens. You have Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton, luckily, in that safety box. But just like Cleveland, the second corner spot is not there. So while I do think that they're going to have some really good success, because Lamar Jackson is very, very difficult to hold down, is very, very difficult to stop, is very, very difficult to get negative yardage on, I think that they're still going to be successful. They're going to take a little bit of a dip just because they lost a lot of solid players. And while they found some very solid replacements, those replacements will not be ready for another 2 or 3 years. They're just too young. They're just too raw right now. Very, very solid athletes, but they need maturity. They need time to develop. They need time to plug in for those very, very costly veterans that the Ravens lost this previous year. Which means we end off the AFC North, topping it with the Cincinnati Bengals in first place, going from 9-8 to 11-6. Now, looking at the Bengals, they were 5-6 last year before Joe Burrow went down with a wrist injury. Most of this team's deficiencies came down to the inability to run the ball and the defense overall not being good enough. Now, as we've talked about with the lack of running the ball, it comes down to what has been the sole focus for Joe Burrow's entire career, and that is the fact that he has lacked a solid offensive line. Now, Cincinnati has looked to address this. They did address tackle. Tackle was a huge, huge get for them this year. They were able to get Trent Brown. They signed Trent Brown, and they were able to draft Amarius Mims. I believe he's from Alabama. But while the interior may show some weakness, it may allow for Burrow to have a little bit more time, which is good. And it may allow a Joe Mixon-less backfield to be able to hit to the outside and get some solid runs. But the question is, are these running backs now going to be able to have any kind of ability like Joe Mixon? The running back room is now spearheaded by Zach Moss. You have Chase Brown behind him, two running backs who are really power backs, really backup running backs, not really starting caliber. There's just not a lot of prestige when it comes to that running back room. So now you have very solid tackles. You could possibly do an outside running game to the outside, but now you don't have the talent at running back. Now, it is unsure when it comes to the receiver room what the attitude of T. Higgins is going to be to start the season. He is going to be playing with Cincinnati this season. I would still potentially look, especially if he is not producing that much, for them to move him at the trade deadline, because I think that there are a lot of teams that could potentially benefit off of a T. Higgins, such as possibly maybe the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe you look at a team that is lower in the standings, maybe Minnesota or Chicago tries to add to their stacked receiver rooms. Who knows? I think that there's definitely still going to be a market out there for T. Higgins. So look for them to move him at the trade deadline. But he is going to start the season. And they did gain Mike Gesicki at starting tight end, but they did lose Tyler Boyd. And that puts a lot of pressure, if T. Higgins is not producing, on the shoulders of Jamar Chase. And I'm not sure if Chase can hold that load. Sure, he is tremendous, do not get me wrong. But he reminds me a lot of the situation that we see with George Pickens, in which a lot of his receptions, a lot of his success comes out of challenging corners for the ball. So the question on the table for Chase is, can he be a receiver with much more of a mix of route running? Can he run those 5-yard crossing routes? Can he run the out route? Can he run post routes? Can he be a better receiver in terms of giving Joe Burrow a more variety in the short to mid passing game? Can he find more success in the short to mid passing game? Because if he can, the offense is going to be successful. Joe Burrow is going to have a lot more time to pass the ball. He's going to have a lot more time to elevate. We've already seen him elevate certain players. We saw him in their Super Bowl year elevate players such as Samaje Perine in the backfield, elevating his tight end that year. I forget his name, but the tight end, CJ Uzmanzada. CJ Uzoma, I apologize, that year. We saw him elevate CJ Uzoma. We saw him the ability to elevate these backup type of players. But Jamar Chase is going to have to produce. The offensive line is going to have to stay solid because they made some small additions when it comes to the defensive side of things, but nothing major. So overall, the Bengals should improve, and they should be in the fight for the top of the AFC North, but they will be relying on certain players to carry a lot more weight than in previous seasons. And if they don't produce, it's another team that could potentially go downhill. But nonetheless, it is going to be a very competitive division, guys. That is it from me today. Let me know what you guys thought about this video, what you think about the AFC North division in general. How competitive do you think it's going to be? Do you think that we could potentially once again see 3 of the 4 teams end this season with a winning record? And who do you think is going to be on top? Do you think that the Pittsburgh Steelers could pull off a miracle? Do you think that the Cleveland Browns can get their offense into gear? Do you think that the Baltimore Ravens' strengths plays more than their weaknesses? Do you think that Joe Burrow finally breaks the curse and is able to finally bring Cincinnati a championship? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. If you have not already, if you're watching this on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe, like the video, comment down below, share with your friends, and turn on the channel's notifications. If you have not followed the social medias, once again, banners popping up right here. All of the ads are down below in the description. Please follow for that so that you can see my reactions to the latest breaking news across the sports world. And without further ado, guys, thank you guys for tuning in. I hope that you guys have an incredible day. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.